As massive data centers move into South Carolina, energy companies are struggling to meet demand, and state leaders are calling this an energy crisis. But new power plants are on the way, and plans have been approved and proposed to meet that need over the coming decade. Joining me now to talk all about it is Eddie Moore. He is the Decarbonization Director for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. He has been following the energy needs of South Carolina for almost a decade now. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, let's talk about broadly South
Yes.
Carolina's energy needs. You've been following this. We know that state leaders say that this is an energy crisis that we're in. We need a lot of power and we're not producing enough. Give me your assessment of where we are right now in terms of our energy needs.
So where we are right now is there is enough energy generation to meet today's needs. And so I think when people talk about urgency, they're looking 5 or 6 years out, and they are seeing projections that the artificial intelligence growth and those artificial intelligence searches use way more electricity than traditional web browser searches. So, and we're seeing artificial intelligence applied in many different areas of business. So if you play out that kind of growth, then new power generation will be needed. So the question is, what kind do we choose and what does it cost? And ultimately, who ends up paying for it? So I think there really is a strong likelihood that there will be a very big increased need for power generation. I think it's true that there is somewhat of a rush to build it. Some of these projects can take 5 years, 7 years, some even longer. So there's a timing issue of trying to build a lot of power generation resources for a load which, frankly, nobody knows for sure what it's going to be 5 years from now.
Well, we are seeing these large companies like Google and the like building data centers in particular. And you mentioned already to power especially the next generation of technology through AI. Just how resource intensive are some of these centers?
It's really unprecedented, the size of the electricity demands of, as a whole, all these data centers around the Southeast that are projected to occur. So just from my experience in the electric power regulatory space over the last 15 or 20 years, utility companies used to view 20 megawatts as a large load, like a big factory. The largest loads have traditionally been steel mills or aluminum mills, which can be 400 megawatts or more. We're now seeing individual data center requests that could be 500 megawatts, even 1,000 megawatts. You're talking about a single site that uses as much electricity as a whole city. Now, a lot of them are 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts. That's still a very big load, but these 500 megawatt loads and up is astronomical.
Wow. So we know that the energy companies, both private and public, are working fairly aggressively to build new installations, new power plants. On Friday, Santee Cooper had their meeting in which they talked about a whole bunch of projects. But first, they sent out a statement saying that the VC Summer site is now going to be, or at least sort of completed by this new group, this Brookfield's Asset Management Group.
Yes.
What did we learn on Friday about that situation?
So Brookfield Asset Management is a company that owns part of the former Westinghouse. So Westinghouse was the one that designed the nuclear reactors that were only half built in South Carolina and that were completed but at an enormous cost in Georgia. So on the positive side, it looks like they've got expertise on the team. And then on the more cautious side, it didn't go that well last time. And I'm not here to be pro or anti-nuclear power. I'm here more to talk, I think, about what is likely from various plans to land on people's electric bills. And I think that is where this nuclear announcement is new for South Carolina, in that what Santee Cooper is telling us is that the ratepayers won't pay for this plant. It's the large customers that are coming online, those data centers, potentially other large customers, that will directly pay for that plant to be completed. And that takes the risk off of your average ratepayer paying an electric bill.
So walk it back, though, for me
Yeah.
first, because I think a lot of people know about this nuclear power plant sort of boondoggle that politicians and energy folks have been talking about for 10 years plus.
Right.
But I think we all kind of understand it in sort of hushed tones and sort of conclusionary statements, opposed to actually understanding what happened. Can you explain what happened, what this project was originally, and where the wheels fell off, and how taxpayers ended up kind of getting stuck with the bill?
Well, I think one thing, you can't truly understand this without understanding that over the whole history of nuclear power, from the late 60s until the present, a large percentage of the projects have either had massive cost overruns or been abandoned. Unlike any other power source, nuclear power has been uniquely risky in terms of the capital investment and the build. And that has spurred over time a lot of different approaches to essentially guarantee that ratepayers will pay for it, no matter what the costs turn out. So with that background, so many of these plants had big cost overruns in the 70s and 80s that nobody built one for 30 years. And in the early 2000s, power companies around the Southeast were projecting significant load growth. The economy was growing and the power demand was growing. And they projected out 10 or 15 years into the future that they would need thousands of megawatts of large power plants. So in South Carolina, they went to the state legislature and they got a bill passed that essentially said, if it's a nuclear plant, the ratepayers will pay for it no matter what. And then the state regulators, getting the message from the legislature that they wanted a nuclear plant, approved it. And the cost overruns began almost immediately upon construction. And it was originally projected to cost between $8 and $9 billion. And when it was abandoned, half built, they had spent $9 billion. So that site still exists, and there's the half-built reactor sitting there. So what Santee Cooper announced within the last week is that they have negotiated and chosen a partner that will seek to develop that site, but off the balance books of Santee Cooper and the ratepayers. So, the one way I would put it is, historically there were so many cost overruns that the utility companies tried to tie the ratepayer to the project so that they wouldn't have to eat the cost. That didn't go very well. And so what we're seeing that's new and different recently, and particularly in South Carolina, is an attempt to get somebody else to pay for it so that it's not such a ratepayer risk.
Potentially the big businesses that are bringing in big data centers?
Essentially cut out the middleman. Instead of have the big data center pay the utility company and the utility company build a plant, just have the big data center build the energy source and cut the rest of us out of it. Now, there's a lot of detail that we don't know yet. But that's the promise, that's the concept that's been floated, and it sounds like they're making progress on it. And I have to give credit to Senator Tom Davis, who represents the Beaufort-Jasper area, who did a lot of work to make this option possible. We don't know yet how it's going to turn out. We don't know a lot of the details, but the concept that companies that want huge additions to the energy system should just directly pay for it.
Yes, city
that's
level amounts of energy.
That's a potentially very beneficial idea.
Well, and I do recall, whenever there's a rate increase conversations happening. People in the community say things like, well, there's a huge demand for energy, but most of that is coming from a few large companies. And so why are we paying for so it does sound like this is a potential solution to huge demands of energy coming from few businesses or players that need a lot of energy. But I want to talk a little bit more about what else happened on Friday, because Santee Cooper laid out its list of projects and that are kind of all going on at the same time that will help meet South Carolina's gigantic energy needs in the next decade or two. One of them, the largest of them, is that site in Colleton County, the Kennedy's station. What did we learn on Friday about that project? What new came from that project?
Well, one thing I'll say is this is almost like an experiment. Like you have two different approaches going on at once. First, you have this new approach where the private sector is going to pay for the nuclear plant. And then compared, the utility companies are going to build their own plant, which happens to be a gas-fired power plant. And those plants are essentially the same size, and they are on a somewhat similar timeline. But what we learned Friday is that it looks like the cost of the gas-fired power plant has doubled in the last year. And historically, that was the problem you had with nuclear plants. The announced costs would turn out to be nowhere near. And if it was a small cost, it wouldn't matter, but it's a huge cost. And so, the numbers we're hearing now is $5 billion instead of what the legislature was told when they passed the bill, $2.5 billion. And that, one thing to emphasize, they haven't even begun construction yet. And there's a lot of risks that could introduce time delays here, and time equals money when you're talking about large construction projects. And probably the biggest risk and the biggest unknown cost at this point is the pipelines and pipeline infrastructure all the way back to Mississippi that has to be upgraded or built new to supply this plant. And that cost has been a tightly held secret. I don't know it, for instance.
So there are a number of things that could be happening here. Either perhaps the scapegoat answer is that when Santee Cooper went before the Senate and said, we think it's going to cost $2.5 billion and we'll split that with Dominion Energy, that they just misspoke, right? That's the scapegoat answer. But what are some other potential reasons for why this cost potentially has doubled?
Well, I think there are reasons that it's doubled that are understandable, and there are reasons that it could further increase. So going back to this data center load growth or projected load growth, I always say there is actual load growth happening, but most of what we're talking about is projections of what's life going to be like 5 or 7 or 10 years from now. That projected growth has meant that all the utility companies in the whole Southeast are racing each other to build power plants. And that, if you're the one that makes power plants, you can charge a premium because of that competition. So that's what's driven the cost up, is the competition. Probably tariffs are part of it, the workforce issues. And of course, there's a bit of a gamble here that 7 years from now, all that load growth may not happen. The AI business is volatile. And so if you build first and then they don't come, the cost is left for everybody else.
Yeah. I wonder if you see a problem with how this whole process plays out, because what we saw last August and during the last legislative session is that the legislature didn't necessarily approve this project, but they kind of gave their blessing to it. We spoke earlier about that off camera, but now they're going to go through with the planning phase. And the legislature kind of said, we sort of like this idea at $2.5 billion. And now we're finding out from Santee Cooper at their meeting that potentially it's actually a $5 billion project. but we still don't even have the official plans yet. When do you think we could find the official plans? And what is the next steps in this process? Is there another regulatory step that people could potentially hear more?
So there's a state agency that has oversight over your electric company. If you are, for planning purposes, if you're not in a co-op territory, and that's called the Public Service Commission. Public Service Commission is expected to receive filings describing the project and its cost in December, probably mid-December. And they will have 6 months to make a decision. So you'll have a window there where you could talk to the agency. I think it's also relevant in South Carolina in particular. If you have a concern, your state legislator it's always good to keep them informed, because this state relies more on kind of legislative governance than probably any other. Most other states, the governor makes a lot of the decisions, but the legislature is the one that put this legislative plan together, enabling the project, and even if they're not formally part of the process, I think their awareness is important.
So that regulatory body does have still some say yet on what gets officially approved.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of wiggle room in how much scrutiny they give it. They could either just say yes, or they could really dig into the details. They have the power to modify a project. So not arbitrarily, there has to be evidence in the record. But part of the question here will be whether at these new doubled costs, what alternatives did we look at? Is this our only option? And I believe it's unlikely to be the only option.
Well, I noticed in that meeting on Friday that one of the things that they said was that $5 billion number should give them enough wiggle room that they won't be coming back for additional funding. So I guess we'll have to see if that is truly what happens, if the plan does eventually move forward. But at the end of the day here, what is the concern when it comes to a doubling in cost for a major power plant in rural Colleton County?
There are a couple of concerns. So, the immediate concern is that plant will serve roughly 2 million customers. So that's $2,500 a customer, not counting the pipeline cost, which is...
We still don't know.
We don't know. And that's with no cost overruns beyond now. Another issue, we haven't even talked about the cost of the fuel to power the plant. And traditionally, the reason that America built a lot of coal plants and a lot of nuclear plants is because it's very risky to rely on gas-fired power plants for baseload power, because the price of gas fluctuates all over the place. It's kind of like, when you used to buy a printer for your home, and then you suddenly discovered what it cost to buy the printer cartridges. This is what gas-fired power plants have been like, and that's why coal and nuclear fuel have much more stable cost profiles. And where a plant of this size is taking us is that the whole economy of South Carolina will be much more dependent on natural gas imports.
A volatile cost fuel.
A cost that can swing $1 billion in a year on the state. When Russia invaded the Ukraine, cost of natural gas went through the roof. And that was roughly $1 billion of extra cost in South Carolina. And so, do we want to be more dependent on it than that? We believe that to the degree you can incrementally build out solar power, you hedge against that gas price. Because the way solar power contracts work, typically you sign a contract for 15 or 20 years, and it's a flat price. So the day you sign that contract, you know what you're paying for power 20 years from now. That's the thing that you miss with any fossil fuel powered plant. And so we're not saying there should be no fossil fuel or that it would be all solar anytime soon, but that steadily building that out is a hedge.
Yeah. It's a complicated subject and one I'm sure that we're going to continue to talk about for years and years to come as more people move to South Carolina and businesses continue to invest in large facilities here that need a lot of power. But what are we missing from this conversation? What haven't we talked about that you think is important folks know about?
I think it's I think the most dynamic technology in the electric power sector right now is battery storage. So the same batteries that are in your cell phone, you add a lot of them together and you get a battery the size of a power plant. And that, if you look the last 2 years nationwide, that has been the biggest addition of new electric capacity on the grid. And those, when you talk about something that was put online last year, they didn't decide to put that online last year. They decided 2 or 3 years in advance. So we're multiple years into a major build out of a new technology on the grid that is, it works with every other technology, but is tailor made to make renewable energy work on the grid. And so people get concerned about the fluctuation in energy supply from renewable energy. But what I'm saying is the answers to that are coming online faster than anything else on the grid.
Okay. Eddie Moore, thanks.
Yep. Thank you.